Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is NoSQL versus SQL databases. And basically, what is a database? Well, a database in and of itself is an organized structure of data, and it's related in some fashion. And when I say related, I mean the tables within that database. All right, so they contain one or more tables that are made up of fields, columns, and rows. So if you see over on the illustration on the right, we have three tables, one of updates, one of users, and one of friends. And where you see those connecting lines between the tables, they are the things that relate one table to the other. All right, so that way we don't have to keep every single piece of information in one table. Perhaps maybe users in one table, orders in another table, the size of those specific orders in another table, shipping logistics in another, so on and so forth. So we allow them to relate. So all of those things together, all of those relations within that database make up a specific customer order or a piece of identifying information. All right, so in doing it in that fashion, it allows for very quick retrieval of information within very large data sets. Now, there are a couple things, or a couple recent developments, I should say, in the last few years, and that is the development of NoSQL databases. So just to compare and contrast a little bit between the two, in a SQL database, as I mentioned, it's a relational database. Okay, that specific database, it's table-based with rows and columns clearly defined in what's called a schema, or what basically the schema says, okay, this is the DNA of that database. This is the identifying information, and this tells me how it's structured. So a database scales vertically by increasing server or hardware horsepower. Okay, so this is a key differentiator between SQL and NoSQL. So it scales vertically. Well suited for high transaction-based applications like e-commerce, things along those lines. Some common SQL databases are MS SQL or Microsoft SQL, MySQL, Oracle, Postgres, DB2, okay, all things that you may be familiar with if you're in that database space. The other thing with SQL databases are they're more mature. It's been around for quite a long time. There's a lot of support for these types of databases. To compare that, we have NoSQL databases. So NoSQL is non-relational or distributed. Okay, so it's document-based, key value pairs, graph, or wide column stores, okay, within a dynamic schema. Comparing it to a SQL database, it scales horizontally by adding more servers to the pool of resources. All right, so we don't take a specific server and beef it up. We just add more servers to the pool. So it scales horizontally versus vertically. And it's very well suited to big data and large unstructured data sets. Whereas SQL is very well suited to structured data, NoSQL works well for unstructured data sets. Okay, think big data. Some common NoSQL databases would be MongoDB, CouchDB, and Google's Bigtable. Okay, so just some names that you may be familiar with. And the other comparison between the two is NoSQL databases is, as I mentioned, relatively new. So there's some new offerings, less mature support. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean it's not as well suited to specific applications. As I said, Google, Facebook, a lot of the really big data-oriented applications and companies rely on NoSQL databases for a lot of their data mining and so forth. So it definitely has a place, and it's definitely coming on strong. However, SQL databases are not going anywhere anytime soon. They definitely have a place for large data sets of very structured data, okay, high transactional-based data, and things along those lines. So I just want to make sure you're aware of the difference between SQL databases and NoSQL. One other thing, just to clarify, SQL databases use that structured query language, or SQL, so you use SQL when you're basically mining the data out of those databases. NoSQL obviously doesn't use SQL, but they use similar types of instruction sets to mine data out of those databases as well.